into the body. And it took a minute to recognize it because, again, that body's so swollen and inflamed and purple. And all of a sudden it's like, that's me. And there's like this ownership of the body and kind of a wanting to care for it and a reciprocity and a concern. And at the same time that I'm having this attachment or this agenda to the body, I'm just pulled at the speed of light into this other realm. And I've always described it like the cosmos because that's what it felt like. There was this delicious, not scary in the least, blackness that first welcomed me. It was like black velvet, this yummy void that I passed through that was holding. It was warm. It was the opposite of what a lot of people associate with darkness. It was holy.
Thanks for watching the Near Death Network here on YouTube. My name is Mark Lewis. I thank you for watching our videos, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And as always, leave us your comments. All right, welcome to another edition of What's Death Got to Do with It here on our YouTube channel on the Near Death Network. My name is Mark Lewis. I created this station essentially to help experiencers and those with wisdom around the space, including academicians and clinicians, get an opportunity to give a first-person account of what they've experienced to then educate the rest of us on how those experiences can serve us going forward. And so I'm very pleased to welcome in a long time coming, Brooke. We've been trying to do this for a while, but you know, everything happens in its time. And so Brooke Grove joins me today from her home somewhere in California, Southern California. Brooke, thanks for stopping by.
Thank you, Mark, for having me. It's an honor to be here.
You know, I know your story pretty well, but let's go back to, let's start about how you were raised. What kind of an environment familially were you raised in? How did that set you up for this experience or not?
Okay. Well, I come from Maryland. That's where I was born and raised. And I was on the countryside of it. So close to the city, but not close enough for my kids' way of knowing. My family was very dedicated to giving us a quality of life that they did not experience coming from poverty. And so they were working a lot. And because of that, they left me with grandparents quite often, more often than not. And my grandparents had a huge role in raising me. Now, that's an interesting dichotomy in and of itself, as one grandparent was a free spirit who was unmarried and did things her own way and just kind of lived by her heart. And the other set of grandparents were, you know, really farmers and really, especially my Sicilian grandmother, married to the Bible and very, very religious. Simultaneously, I went to parochial school from the time I was 3 until I was 18. So Catholicism had a huge role in my family of origin and what I was taught about Creator and about myself and human behavior. So that's a bit about the family.
Well, and you had a shared death experience with your grandmother that we'll get to.
Yes.
Was that prior to your NDE?
No, my shared death experience actually was the catalyst for realizing that my NDE had given me profound blessings. Prior to that time, my NDE occurred in 2010, and it was 2014 that I had the shared death experience with my grandmother as she was transitioning that April. And interestingly, both my boys come through April immediately after that. However, she was really struggling to let go. She had Alzheimer's for 12 years, and she did not know who we were, and it had been a very painful experience for my entire family. However, when I got to Maryland to be with her at her bedside, my grandfather was just holding on, and we sat at her bedside for 12 hours, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And when it became very clear to me through my after effects, as I have the visual ability in which enhances my intuitive ability to read energy, but I can actually see, and I also see the celestials and the angels and some of your guides. It just depends on the person's team, their spiritual team. I could see my grandmother wanted to go, and that the column of light was around her, and that the arrival teams, as I call them, which were really her angels and her beloveds on the other side, they were all present, but she wasn't going. So I trusted my intuition at 7 p.m. and I asked my grandfather to take a walk. And at that point, I went to her and I held her hand and I whispered to her that everyone was there and that everyone was ready and that it would be the most beautiful homecoming she would know. And she held my hand and said my name, which she had not said in 12 years. And then
Wow.
she let go, and I watched her just radiate on upward. And, it was one of the most poetic moments of my life up until then. And yet, it was also such a huge evolutionary journey that was opened, because in that moment I had to hold the grief of my family, particularly my grandfather, when he walked in and was devastated and at first
Hmm.
angry that she had transitioned without him, and then also my joy in knowing what she returned to, and that her body was finally liberated from the prison the mind had been for so long. So it's just
Hmm.
really, interesting experience, because prior to that, I'd been struggling against my after effects. I didn't want them. I wanted to go back to normalcy. I wanted to go back to being a clinician. I wanted to not see the things I saw and feel the things I thought. But my grandmother showed me that I could use these gifts and help other people and bring them peace. And in that, have an emotionally corrective experience myself. And that was a power that I've really maximized in the days and years since.
So that helped you. That was almost the impetus for your reintegration to proceed forward. Because I've talked to so many folks like yourself who are experiencers, and the reintegration period's a real pain in the ass.
It is.
You know it because you come back here, you're over there where it's just total love and bliss, and then you come back here to this, and you're saying, "What the hell am I doing here?" But your grandmother, and I did work in hospice in many situations like you just articulated,
Mhm.
someone who's holding on only for a family member. If you could remove that family member so the trauma of the actual transition is not there, you
Mhm.
could deal with it later. So kudos to you for acknowledging and recognizing
Definitely. And I want to give kudos to my pap because,
that.
he survived another few years after that. And in the years that came, we would sit like we called them his rocking chair moments. I would come in a weird way, he taught me how to be a death doula. As he knew he was approaching
Ah,
the other side, he said, "What you did for her, can you help me?" And
very
so
cool.
I would go home and I would just sit, and he had this total transformation. This was a man who, had been torpedoed in World War II and swam in frozen water and came back with very
Wow.
severe PTSD, so severe that he went to bed when he got discharged. He had this huge fro. They called him Whitey because he had a platinum blonde fro. He went to bed one night at only like 24 years old, woke up, all the hair was on the pillow. His hair never returned. It was just,
Wow.
severe, as what they called at the time, shell shock. And he was aware of that, and he became aware of how I dealt with my own trauma throughout my childhood and adolescence. And eventually, when he gets to the point of transitioning, he says, "I don't know what you've done or how you've done it, but I've witnessed it, and I've made a lot of choices I'm uncomfortable with, and I don't want to carry those with me." So we sat for, I think it was months pretty much, of going back and forth before he transitioned in October, and really went through these. And he gave me that gift of seeing that someone can process death with dignity. They can know it's coming and celebrate the life that they've lived without the weight of shame. And those stories, those medicinal stories he told me, and the passion and the vigor and the growth opportunities he showcased and highlighted, they are so much of what informs me as a medicinal storyteller now.
Wow, that's remarkable. Yeah, I didn't know that. And so I'm really grateful that you shared that insight with us. But let's backtrack now to at the time of your NDE. You had been going through some health issues for about 7 years and had a misdiagnosis, right? And then, not on purpose, but when this drug that you'll articulate was introduced into your regimen, it catapulted you from where you were into essentially having your near death experience. So, can you recount that for our listeners?
So, long story short, when I was completing my first master's degree in 2006, I had a teacher that really pushed me. And I do believe she did it from love, but unfortunately, she really pushed. I had shared my trauma as part of a presentation that was to be contained within my small cohort, which was just 20 people. I thought I would share it just to share how it informed the work and then let it go and move on. I had no intention of ever speaking about it again. Well, she really loved what I shared, and she wanted me to put it in the form of my master's thesis. I did not want to do this, Mark. I said no 3 times, and yet she kept pushing. And eventually I agreed and I did the book. And I've since called it Pandora's Box initially, because as soon as I opened up that trauma in the container of my education, I started becoming ill. So those 5 to 7 years you spoke of being sick, that occurs during that first master's degree. During that time, all of these, it seemed like really random illnesses were coming on. There was inflammation, there was pulmonary distress, there was discoloration in the hands, there were locked joints. I was only 23 when this began, so it was pretty shocking to go from extraordinary health and varsity soccer and Olympic development, and then suddenly I can't breathe and I can't type and I'm not walking and nobody can explain to me what exactly is going on. Now, I was a young diagnostician myself, and I understood reliability and validity as being hallmarks of any legitimate diagnosis. However, I would go from doctor to doctor within Los Angeles County, and they would send me from specialist to specialist. Okay, it's pulmonary, go see critical care pulmonary. Oh, it's rheumatology, go see the rheumatology. Oh, now your kidney's involved, go see them. Oh, you need pain management, go see them. All of these different doctors, but no consistency. And to me, as a young diagnostician, it did not make sense that I would continue to receive different autoimmune diagnoses. Why were they never consistent? And so I looked into the research, and at the time, Hopkins was the leading autoimmune research center in the world. Okay, this is back in 2010. I decide I'm going to go to Hopkins. I have family that's in Maryland. I'll go stay with the family. I will get seen, and they put me on a wait list. I wasn't even supposed to be seen right away, but I'm like, I don't care. I'm going, and that's going to happen, and I'm just going to stay till it happens. Well, I get to Maryland, and I'm really thirsty for some answers, but another flare up comes on. And I did have an appointment to go and be seen by them, but it wasn't right away. And so I call the hospitals out in California and I say, I'm having this flare up. I don't know what to do. And they tell me in no uncertain terms, and again, you're talking about 4 or 5 specialists here at this point, to double the medication, that it will hold me over until I get to the doctors, and that an extra dose of each is not going to be harmful. That seemed benign at the time, as there were a multitude of drugs involved, from asthma medication to pain medication to things for the muscles to help them relax, but nothing seemed like it would be toxic with just one more pill. Well, unbeknownst to all of us, there was involvement from the liver. The liver was already compromised, and somehow that had been entirely overlooked, as there'd never been any symptoms suggesting that. And so the products that were in a multiple drug that actually did the damage, it's Tylenol.
Hmm.
Tylenol at any kind of dose when there's liver failure that's excessive,
Yeah.
will rapidly take the liver. And so I took the medication attempting to calm down the discoloration, the locked joints, the pain, and it was not the pain medication nor any of the other things that did it. It was the Tylenol within multiple products. So what ends up happening is the Tylenol crashes the liver. The liver's already toxic, it's failing. Liver goes. As the liver goes, I fall, I hit my head, I collapse. By the grace of God, my family returns home early from a trip and finds me on the bed. At this point, the liver has failed so rapidly, it has taken the kidneys and the lungs with it. So I'm in systemic organ failure on the bed and completely unconscious. It happened so fast that when the liver fails as fast as mine did, you bloat about 15 to 20 pounds. It's swelling that just comes out. So I
Wow.
was enormously swollen. My skin was purple from head to toe. I was also jaundiced. The eyes were completely yellow. And so my family comes in and sees this. I'm non-responsive. They call 911. I'm taken to the local hospital. They're about an hour outside the city. And the local hospital proceeds to helicopter me to Hopkins. It is in
Wow.
Hopkins ICU that my near-death experience begins.
Wow. That's remarkable, just the way it played out. And then for you to get there and then start to go through the machinations of the near death experience, and and your recovery was remarkable, how you taught yourself how to walk again,
Mhm.
with the assistance of someone. But initially, you got out of bed and you did all those things. But let's take us through when you coded, when you went over there, when you had your experience, because th- something really, really cool, which I haven't ever heard in anyone else's experience. I'm not saying it hasn't happened,
Mhm.
but you encountered a couple of lights that would be instrumental in your life after the angelics that you encountered initially. So if you could give us that bird's eye view from your vantage point, I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, so my NDE begins as my consciousness is pulling out of the body in ICU. And I see what I always compare it to like a medical TV show. It looked like you were watching like ER or the X Files. And to me, the X Files resonates the most because there was this like curiosity about what was happening. I was kind of like Mulder. I wanted to check everything out, what's going on. And I'm watching Scully, but I don't really know what's happening. And I realize, like, as I get closer to this scene, like, what are they doing? And who is this? And oh my goodness, I see the body. And it took a minute to recognize it because, again, that body's so swollen and inflamed
Right.
and purple. And all of a sudden, it's like, that's me. And there's like this
Mhm.
ownership of the body and kind of a wanting to care for it and a reciprocity and a concern. And at the same time that I'm having this attachment or this agenda to the body, I'm just pulled at the speed of light into this other realm. And I've always described it like the cosmos because that's what it felt like. There was this delicious, not scary in the least, blackness that first welcomed me. It was like black velvet, this yummy void that I passed through that was holding, it was warm. It was the opposite of what a lot of people associate with darkness. It was holy. And as I passed through that portal, I then was welcomed into the symphony of lights. And the first three that danced with me were this majestic ruby red, this gorgeous amethyst, and this beautiful emerald green. And through those three colors danced this very beautiful, but it was almost more dissolved sapphire blue. Okay. It's only much later that I would come to realize that those are the exact colors of the four primary archangels Raphael, Michael, Gabriel, and Uriel. And so these lights welcome me, and I recognize them. And it is a homecoming. These are the lights that sang to me as a child. These are the lights I would see in the trees and amongst the flowers and with the elementals. And I spoke to them as a child, and I would describe to my parents how I talked to angels. But unfortunately, I wasn't in Fatima and it didn't fit their of what religion was supposed to be. So they didn't exactly accept it. And I had shut that down as a child. I knew it wasn't safe to talk about in my
So
family.
did you feel validated when you first recognized them?
Absolutely. And, nothing in my NDE spoke to me in the language we use. Everything was felt sensation. All of our senses were amplified. And the sixth sense, the one that's always been strongest for me, intuition, was the catalyst for how we communicated. Everything was telepathic. If you thought or wanted to know something, you felt it, or you were answered in a symphony of enhanced light and vibration. If I wanted to go left, I think left, and therefore I am left. Okay, those kind of things. So I said to them through my orb, because I myself was light. I never saw my light, but I could feel it expanding and contributing.
Radiating.
Yes, in reverence to some of the things that would become discussed or felt or intuited. And so I say to them internally, you were with me as a child, and I get a resounding yes from all of them. And there is this validation and there's this release that comes with it, as if the weight of being an intuitive child and having these gifts was released, and that it was okay, and that the shame and the stigma and the branding that I carried from my family was gone. And that felt in itself profoundly healing and delicious. And I wanted to stay in that and marinate in it and be with family, because to me, these angelic lights, these celestial beings, they felt more like family than any blood I had ever known. And that's not to say that I hadn't known love in this incarnation. There was a lot of trauma, but there was a lot of love as well. However, love seemed conditional in my human experience, that it had to be earned, that you had to behave a certain way, that you had to kind of, follow a script in a way. And with these beings, I was loved exactly as I am. The good, the bad, the ugly, the in between. It was all sacred. There was no judgment. And that for my soul was liberating. And I just really immersed myself in the juiciness of that and soaked in those colors, because if you were in resonance with the blue, Michael, you become the energy of Michael, this warrior, this protector. If you were with, Raphael, you felt the medicine of healing, of the magic of just really being able to know that this entire vessel that we are in contains all it needs to self-heal and self-regenerate. And when I was with Gabriel's energy, the emotions were sacred. They were a chalice. They were something to be, consumed with love and to nourish the being. And Uriel gave me an appreciation for some of the systems and struggles I'd had on Earth. And so, though they never identified themselves in this way, the energies of these angels became paramount to washing away the debris and the heaviness and the density of my earth walk. And yet at the same time, there was this magnetic, beautiful light that was calling to me. And this light appeared to me as this rich white, but it wasn't all white. It had like diamond white fire sparkling through it. And it called without saying a word. It magnetized me to it. And I wanted to go to it. In fact, it felt like I wanted to go right to it at first. Mm-hmm. But as I began to go towards it quicker and quicker, suddenly there was a pause. And I wasn't sure what was causing it. And at that moment is when the angels who were traveling with me in unison let it be known that I had a choice, that I could reunify with that light, that the light was the creator, and that all life comes from that life, that we are fractals of that light, and that I would return to that light, whether it be now or later. And knowing that I could go back later seemed to open something within my oversoul, within my higher selves, my higher knowing. And at that time, images began to come through. And one of the images that was most pronounced for me was the earth. And she was basking in the citrine, this beautiful yellow light. And around the earth were all of these beings. They were human, like, I often say humanoid. They were like us, but they weren't exactly like us. And they were all citrine yellow as well, but a very soft yellow. And rather than completely touching, they were like this, like the hands were kind of like this. And they're close together, but that light is leaping from one hand to the other. And they're creating this halo around the earth. And she didn't, the one angel who to me feels more feminine did not say, this is ascension, or this is the evolution in consciousness, or anything of that kind of very earth-based language. Mm-hmm. Instead, it was, this is what will happen in a matter of years. And this is what your soul and so many others who have come to earth and experienced so much suffering came here for. And you came here to do that. That's the original plan. That's what you signed on for. And that's why there's been so much pain. And we're sorry for your hurt. But that trauma is medicine. It is wisdom. And that wisdom, when unified with this field, will change the earth, and the earth will change humanity. And as soon as I felt that, it was like, get me back in there. Sign me up. I want to go back. Even though they made it clear in no uncertain terms that I would
be challenging.
I would go back to more trauma. They didn't whitewash it. And yet when my soul saw where humanity was headed. I had this knowing I wouldn't be alone in the work anymore. And if I wasn't alone, then I would be able to do it. And so I say, I want to do it. Send me back. Send me back. How do I get back? And at that point, the angels let it be known to look for a light unlike any other. And so I'm in this vast cosmos like space, Mark. It's infinite. Everywhere I look, there's just more light and more blackness. And I can go in any direction. I can be anywhere and I can touch it all and I can take in the resonance. But there's no in or out from what I can see. So what do I do? So I'm just kind of asking questions. I'm curious. I'm playful. It's a very childlike energy in this space. Well, I'm kind of dancing through the space and they're just kind of like letting me play. And I see these two lights that are much softer. They're not as, I would say, the vibrancy and the angelic lights and the creator light is so intense. It's like if you took the threshold in Photoshop or on an image altering software and you just took it all the way to the max. Okay. That would still not be bright enough for how these lights were. I've yet to encounter lights in the intensity on the earth walk that they were over there. And yet here's these two lights that are bright, but they're a little bit more earth-like. And unlike the angels and the creator, which seem to call me and want to engage me and want to communicate with me, even through the inner knowing versus words, these weren't saying anything. So I come up to the first one and it's this beautiful, beautiful, bright, bright indigo blue. And I'm kind of like, okay, hi, what's going on? Who are you? What do you have to tell me? Nothing. Like absolutely no sound, but what, or no feeling, no sensation. And yet I have this like intuitive desire to like hold this light. And I can't understand because it felt like all the other lights were holding me and kind of supporting me. And what's my role with this light? Nothing really happens. So I pivot and move on to the next light. The next light is this beautiful green, this really intense grass-like green. And same thing. It's an attractive light. It's beckoning me. I want to hang out with it. I like its energy, but it's not communicating anything. So I have this curiosity and I'm like, okay, well, you two are interesting, but you're not talking. So I'm just going to move on and I'll figure this out later if there's anything to figure out. And I let go. And it's at that point that I pivot in another direction intuitively. And I see this blinding, and I've often called it hellish because it was just like piercing and nothing like the softness of the other lights. The second I encounter that intensity, it takes me from the celestial peace and ineffable bliss back into the body. That bright, hellish like light turns out to be a neurological flashlight. They were taking my vital signs. Body. I had been declared brain dead due to my Glasgow score being so low and the testing that they were utilizing at the time. Well, I wasn't. They had told my family it'd be about a 1% chance of me waking up. My family had already been preparing for my death and were coping with that.
Wow.
And they were checking the vitals. I'm catapulted back into the body. I have PIC lines going into both sides of my brain, which likely from a scientific perspective saved my brain functioning. However, I'm intubated. I'm strapped down to a bed and I have absolutely no memory of how I got there. And that's when the dichotomy, the dance between what I experienced in this peace and this playfulness, this curiosity, and this intense choice to want to be back starts to meet the dichotomy of actually being back, actually being in pain, waking up to a broken body, and not understanding what had occurred.
Well, we don't want to leave the audience with that spellbinding cliffhanger of the two lights that you acknowledged but didn't acknowledge you back. At what time did you have the aha moment? Was it when you had the boys or was it prior to it? Explain to them how that transpired.
I begin to know who they are when my eldest, the indigo light, when he incarnates into the womb. I start having like this intense courage. I'd been still trying to defend my dissertation at this point. I had taken a huge leave of absence and then went back. And 3 times when I went to defend, I got sick again. Every time I tried to defend that paper, the autoimmunity came back out of nowhere. And then on the 3rd time, I discovered I was pregnant. And when I felt the energy, I knew I was raising an intuitive. Growing up in abuse, which had occurred when I was with my grandparents, they didn't know, but it was occurring with a family member in the home. Growing up that way, I had always prayed for someone like myself, like someone that was intuitive, someone that understood that God was more than what I had been taught, and that we all contained God within us. And I'd wanted that my whole life. And I prayed for like a brother or sister or someone like me, and it never happened. And then I ended up carrying that child. I ended up, in a way, calling him into existence. And when I felt him come into the womb, I knew what he was. And then interestingly, I went to my first IANS conference, International Association of Near Death Studies, in 2012. And I met a woman who would become my dear friend, PMH Atwater. And when we were chatting, she commented to me about the intuitive, galactic child I was carrying from the stars. And it wasn't until he was born and they handed him to me, and it was a pretty traumatic birth. I'd done 27 hours of natural hypnobirthing labor, drug-free, and then his heart started crashing. He just wasn't coming out, and we were worried about cerebral palsy and whatnot, so I had an emergency C-section, and that was very traumatic to me, as I didn't want a medical intervention. I didn't want to go through all that. But as the surgery concluded and they handed him to me, the whole room shot into this humongous wave of indigo, and I started sobbing. I was like, it was you, it was you, it was you. I wouldn't meet my beautiful little green grassy delight until 4 more years later, but the same exact event occurred with him. And my children's names, actually, one is Sanskrit and it references heaven, the other one is Old Norse, Viking, and it references the earth. And I often say, when I talk about my integration, that my children came from heaven to help keep me on earth and remind me that heaven is something we can embody through the vehicle of the human body, as long as we are connected and grounded and opened in heart. So they were just a very beautiful love note from spirit. And I'm just so grateful I got to meet them that way. And that my eldest, the intuitive, does recall it. He was only 3 years old when we would be reading stories. And one day he interrupted and he said, "Thank you for choosing me in the stars. I
Oh,
was
wow.
the blue one."
Wow.
Now, that's some kind of deep knowing to say I was the blue one. And that still
Yeah.
gives
Talk
me.
about validation. It doesn't get any clearer than that. Huh?
Exactly. And then my little earth seed on the other side, he really grounds us. So it's so appropriate. He showed up with grass and he's my little Taurus. And so they've just been so medicinal. And I feel so fortunate that they revealed themselves to me on the other side, kind of like a postscript of good reasons to come back. And they really have been the best reason.
That's a fantastic story. I mean, you couldn't author that if you were writing a Hollywood script. That's just so remarkable, poignant, and touching, and just heart-rendering. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, you're
But
absolutely
you
welcome.
know more than anybody, if you're an experiencer, you come back to reintegrate, and you're an academician, and you're a clinician, which you have your own integrative healing business as well. It's a real tussle, and I'm sure to deal with skeptics who say you're just Looney Tunes,
Mhm.
they don't ascribe any veracity to your experience at all.
Mhm.
How do you reconcile those things in your current life? Because you have gone back to your practice. You do still offer that as a modality for people who reach out to you, but
Mhm.
the noise is out there. How do you deal with it?
Well, the noise is out there, but we are the antenna. What we choose to receive, we choose to either resonate and align with, or we choose to neutralize. And, part of why I left clinical psychology was that if I stayed in the frequency of how it was being taught back then, now remember, this is 15 years ago. Thankfully, the field has changed quite a bit since then. However, mind body medicine wasn't where it is. Transpersonal psychology wasn't welcomed to the table, as it's slowly beginning to be now. And so, talking about spiritual psychology and consciousness, that wasn't trendy in clinical psychology. In fact, in prestigious schools, it was very frowned upon for APA oriented programs. And that's what I was in. And so, when I came back and I attempted to speak that language and put the white coat on and be Dr. Brooke, because I was defending a dissertation that I'd worked almost 13 years to build up all the degrees and the training for, I would fall into their frequency. frequency. I would fall into pathologizing my own lived experience. And I knew that I was oriented times 4. In psychology, that's person, time, place, and situation. If you're oriented times 4, according to how we are trained, you are not hallucinating. You are not delusional. You are not, for lack of better layman's terms, crazy. And so I knew I was constantly oriented times 4, and yet I was having what they would label paranormal and, at worst case, pathologized as psychotic, after effects. And so I could either drink the Kool-Aid and participate in that club and stay at that frequency, or I could say, this doesn't feel well. And when I stay in this water, I become contaminated. And that's what was actually happening. I was getting sick when I attempted to reduce my lived experience to the way that they were labeling things at that time. And so my son gifted me the opportunity of, there's a new life coming through. There's a new paradigm waiting to be born. And some of us have come in for that. Spirit had already shown me that humanity would be uniting to utilize lived experience to take this new frequency from the earth and make it part of the evolution of humanity. And so, though I had no concrete evidence of that, I knew that my gifts and what I was doing defied what I had been trained. And so that meant that the training lacked. The training was not whole. And if it wasn't whole, I wasn't marrying myself to it anymore. And so I opted to walk away from the clinical path. I let go of my credentials. I chose to exist outside the system with the fierce belief that a new system would be born from that, a more holistic system, a system where disciplines weren't at each other's heads. Instead, it was a heart integration. And so I took the different paths I had walked in addition to my spirituality, and I started making kind of my own water, my own thing that could, ease my system and allow me to receive all the guidance and wisdom I had been shown and had been gifted, but then give it to others, because I knew from going into groups like IANS, I knew from reaching out to other communities where people were experiencing psychic phenomena or after effects that I wasn't alone. And even though I was so analytical and cerebral, I knew there were other people like me that were opening to these worlds and had both skill sets, and we're going to need a way to integrate it. I found that when I went into ascension communities and places where they were talking about a lot of this, I didn't feel comfortable. They're talking about, ascension in like 5D and multidimensional and interdimensional and Palladians. And I'm all like, whoa, dude, I want some science around all this. And at the same token, in those communities, they weren't using any science. So it seemed like it was too far extreme on both sides. Psychology wouldn't allow the spirit, and on the other side, ascension wouldn't allow the science. And I was like, this doesn't make sense. How are we going to help others if we don't have vernacular that they understand? And
Right,
so
you almost have to merge the two to create a new paradigm where people can be served by both, the strengths of both. And like you said, not the, just like today, the noise of the social media. You don't have to participate in the far left, far right. Most people are center anyway. Don't fixate on that. Give us an opportunity to enlighten you with this new paradigm. And then is that how you framed your practice?
That's really what it became. I mean, I'll tell you the truth. In 2018, when I was preparing to go to Seattle for an IANS conference, which was my return after not going for many years, I finally felt comfortable. I was extremely shy at that point. I was a wallflower. I didn't talk. I hadn't told my story to anyone, hadn't shared it with anyone.
That's hard to believe, Brooke.
I know.
That you were a wallflower at
I
any
actually
time.
was my whole childhood. Yes. When I'm safe, I'm an ambivert. So when I feel safe or comfortable, I'm extremely extroverted. But when I'm in a container that doesn't feel safe, my trauma response comes on. I'm extremely introverted and shy. And I go into my head and retreat. And that's how I was at IANS. I mean, my dear friend, Peter Panagor, we had lunch the next year at a conference, and he said to me, do you ever talk? And now we present together. So, the world changes a lot. But at that first conference that I returned to, I land in Seattle And another synchronistic event that leads us to this discussion. I am getting off the plane and my ex-partner calls and asked if I could do a 5150. I was still working as a clinician at this point, and that's a suicidal hold. Okay, for someone that's having a mental health crisis. It turned out one of our friends who I had already witnessed was abusing plant medicine, and I mean abuse, not using it in ceremony, taking copious amounts to deal with his depression. It was an unhealthy use of a sacred substance. And I had warned people I was concerned, but everyone thought they want to mind their business, you know, all the things. I didn't want to overstep my boundary as I wasn't his clinician. So I stepped back. Well, he ended up completing suicide while my ex was calling me to make the phone call. That same week, I had lost 2 other people to suicide. Okay. One, a near death experiencer that couldn't cope with the after effects. And the other was not someone I knew. I was hiking in Huntington Beach, and in some way it's as if the soul wanted me to be present with them because a man completed suicide as I was hiking with my child out there. And it was a very disorienting experience because I'd been living with suicidality and really coping through my own clinical skills and my knowing, and knowing that I had children now and I wanted to be there for them, and I wasn't going to exit that way. But it was becoming really evident to me that more and more people in the NDE community were exiting this way, and that human consciousness was coming to a purification point, a changing point very soon in our evolution, and that there would be a lot of souls that didn't feel they could complete their journey. So that series of 3 suicides in 1 week, while we were talking about after effects in Seattle that year, is when I decided that I needed to start speaking, because I'd almost become one of those statistics. I was aware that 7% of adult experiencers would complete suicide in the first 10 years following their NDE, 21% of childhood experiencers. I was not willing to become one of those statistics, nor did I want other people to become them. But I knew from my own experience that I didn't feel comfortable going to my own field. I didn't feel comfortable going to a clinician because I didn't want to be stigmatized. I already struggled with believing if this was real. I didn't need someone else to question that and put that into my head or accuse me of making things up or being attention seeking. And at the same time, I didn't feel comfortable with the clergy. I had come from deep religious trauma within my Catholic upbringing. When I had disclosed my abuse, I was someone that disclosed. Very few children do, but I ultimately did. When I did that, I had priests and nuns normalize it and tell me to go ask for forgiveness and to go pray. And even my abuser told me I should find Jesus, and didn't even say sorry or it defended what he did essentially as normative. And so I had a lot of religious trauma and didn't feel comfortable with the clergy. I didn't feel comfortable with psychology. And so if I didn't feel those ways, even though I had deep ties to both, how are other people going to feel? And I realized I didn't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I didn't have to abandon my psychological training. I didn't even have to abandon my PhD candidacy, insofar as I could take that as a foundation, and I could step upon that foundation and utilizing the skills I've been intuitively taught, including the hands-on energetic medicine that you mentioned that I use to co-create spontaneous remission in the hospital with my guides, my angels. I could do that for other people. And so that's what I began doing. And it was a total kind of field of dreams moment, Mark.
Mhm.
I had this whole, if I build it, they will come. And I remember my mom teasing me, like, you're going to leave Palo Alto and this prestigious education to what? Help some hippies? You know? She completely did not get it and thought it was like the worst idea in the world. And I kept sitting there. I was like, if I build it, they will come. I have no idea how. And I never advertised my practice. I just started telling my story and telling about what I did for myself to heal. And in the beginning, it was that I was working with near-death experiencers. That's who came to me. They
Mhm.
needed help. They needed integration. But as I told my story more and more, my history with psychology, my ability to work with starseed children and understand the cosmos and what's going on within ascension, but having a grounded, informed, scientific way about it, attracted parents, neurodivergent parents, children start coming to me. They don't want them to be labeled. They don't want them to exist within the current framework. And so they started bringing them to me. And slowly but surely, it expanded from just near-death experiencers to a lot of beautiful, highly sensitive persons from across the globe. Some are mystical experiencers, first and foremost. A lot of people are doing plant medicine and they're coming back and they're wanting to integrate it in a healthful way. So now all of these interesting persons that are on their own individualized healing path are finding me, and we're co-creating together. And the goal of my practice is the same thing that Spirit taught me. It is to teach and guide and heal through Christ consciousness, through Sophia, through the embodiment of divine light. But the goal is to open the container of the person so that they remember that they are that holy chalice that Gabriel showed me I am, as are you, and that they learn to fill their own container with light and then go out and radiate that light. So it's really about teaching the skills and the education and clearing away the debris so that people can be their own self-healers, because at our core, that's what the light's about. That light can eradicate any darkness as long as we choose to contain it. And my life has definitely not been easy since. Spirit was correct about the traumas, but because I have that chalice of light, because I stay connected to it, I've been able to dance through that darkness and always come back to the light, come back to center.
Well, and it's really remarkable for someone who's not myopic on what you've gone through, but is familiar with what you've gone through, that this is all part of the puzzle, right? This is the puzzle that is Brooke. And now you're completed and you've still got a lot to do, but you set it up beautifully. So for people, as we close here, so people who would like to engage you professionally, what is the best way to go about that?
Just send me an email. I like to, I always just scan the energy with Spirit's permission of the email. So for me, it's always, if the energies align, I'm happy to go whatever, in whatever direction someone reaches out to me. I do work predominantly immersively. So that means I try to only take a few individuals a year for the immersive deep dives. And that's because we're going every 2 weeks and we're going really deep. And I need to see that they're doing homework. But I do individual healing sessions as energetically called. So just feel free to send me an email through my website, which is brookgrovehealing.com. I'm also super excited. And Mark, you know, this is a long time coming. I have taken the energy of these past 5 years. And I mean, I've done some pretty tremendous things in the past 5 years, simultaneously to this world changing. And I've really taken that plus the knowing of my lived experience and created a book on trauma and transcendence. So in June, my memoirs, The Beauty in the Broken Glass, will be coming out, and I'm super excited about that. So if you want to pre-order that, please send me an email. Working on the pre-order page in the coming months, and that'll be up by April, and the book will be out in June. So,
well, let's do another episode to chronicle the release of the book, and we can revisit some of this, but we'll expand on it and we'll put it forward. I always like to leave the show for people who haven't, been exposed to this particular part of life and consciousness, and that death is not the end, that it's clearly an extension of consciousness. It's like a transition, walking from one room into another. What are some of the salient points that you could offer them if they haven't had an experience like this to help them navigate more through this turbulent time that we're in?
Really, that all things at their core, at their Christ light, at that fractal of the divine that exists in all things, even the darkest, scariest things, so much of what's marinating in the collective field right now is dark because it's coming up, right? At its core, everything wishes and desires and is programmed to return to love. And often the louder and scarier and angrier the rage or the noise or the collective, that means the capacity, the threshold, the buffet of light that exists within that darkness is even greater. And so many feel that they're being tested over and over by walking in the darkness. But the more you dance in the darkness, the more that you're pushed into that closet, it is to illuminate that God light within you. And so it's an invitation to really look at what's happening in the here and now, or look at what's happening within your own psyche, your own energy, your own heart, and understand that whatever hurts is waiting to love. A classic example is shame. You know, in my system, there was so much shame from being a complex trauma survivor and walking into multiple trauma situations over and over and over again. And there was self blame. And, you know, I wanted to stuff the shame away. I wanted to push it away. I wanted to not be in resonance with it. But it wasn't until I invited that shame out and looked it dead in the eye and asked it, how do I love you? That's when I discovered my power. When I realized that that darkness didn't want to hurt me, it wanted to be loved. And that's the invitation right now, not to fight with each other, but to understand that all of this hurt is a reclamation of love. It's love seeking a place to land. It's love that's been denied. It's love that hasn't been known. Love that didn't even, I mean, so many of us have a really perverse sense of love because we haven't known the type that God is. God is
Right.
unconditional. God is no judgment. And that invitation is everywhere right now to look at the other, look at, at the darkest wound or the darkest, what you see is the opposite of an ally, what you see is maybe an enemy right now. Look at them and say, you are my teacher. What may I learn?
Right.
And
And it's a work in progress. And they're, each individual acknowledges and recognizes things independently of the whole. We are that fractal, that divine source of light. Each individual soul has all the capabilities. And I think you've articulated that beautifully. And we'll put your contact information in the show notes. But thank you so much for doing this, because we didn't really get into what you've been going through. But
oh no, that's all good. I don't need to go there. I've lived it.
but we really appreciate it. And thank you so much.
No, thank you, Mark. It was an honor.